You are listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. This is my podcast about the play of old, new, and future role-playing games. And here we act, react, and interact intentionally with the very alchemy of play. Under my internet handle of RuneSlinger, I've been sharing my ongoing explorations into RPGs online since launching the Casting Shadows YouTube channel in 2009 and the written blog in 2010. I've been a role-playing gamer since 1983, and I guess it's safe to say now, at this point, that I enjoy few things more than RPGs. I've been described as being practically indistinguishable from Bacchus, minus the wine, revelry, farming, and general licentiousness. I'm a known appreciator of role-playing games, swords, unlovely music, things that go well with gravy, and efficient sources to deliver caramel. I live quietly with my wife and a large pack of once discarded dogs in South Korea, in a place where the mountains hold moot. And I hope you will come with me for this episode and get involved in the discussion. There are two things on the agenda for this episode. The first is a listener call in reference to our recent episode with BJ Boyd, the Arcane Alienist, where we talked about memory and mysteries and things like that. So first, we'll listen to that call and discuss what comes of it. But then, this episode will take us on a journey through time. And when we do that on this podcast, that means going back and taking a look at an old post. And this one in particular comes from December 22nd of 2010, and it's entitled By Any Other Name. And usually when we do this sort of episode, I will interrupt the post to bring in perspective from the current year, how things may or may not have changed or grown more the way that I'm talking about in the post. So we'll see what happens this time. But before we get into By Any Other Name from December 22nd, 2010, let's first hear what Jason Connerley of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast has to say about my conversation with BJ and the gamer's memory.
Hey, Anthony, Jason here. Just calling to say I enjoyed your talk with BJ. You know, an interesting companion podcast would be the 21 March episode from 2018 of Weird Studies, Dungeons and Dragons, or the Reality of Illusions, I think it's called. I'll send you a link to it. But it's a really interesting podcast. Takes them a little while to get wound up, but they talk about memory, talk about a number of other things that I think, you know, anybody interested in the hobby would find kind of fascinating. So keep up the great work. I will talk to you guys soon. By the way, there was something at the end there where you guys were talking about mysteries and not wanting the skill that gives you the answer. You don't want the nat 20 to let you know who the killer is right away. But, you know, to some degree, when you look at some mysteries and some stories, you do know who the killer is right away. You just have to figure out how to prove it, right? So it would be interesting. I don't think it would be game-breaking for a character to have that gut feeling, oh, I know so-and-so did it. I know they're guilty, but how do I prove it, right? And then, of course, the game is figuring out the evidence so you can prove it. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for the kind words. Jason, it's good to know that you are out there. It's been a while since that episode was released and since you sent in this message. But as you know, there's a certain degree of sporadicness, not ultimate sporadicness, not apex sporadicness, but anyway, a certain degree of sporadicness present in the production of this podcast. And so it's taken this long to provide you with an answer. So I did follow the link that you gave, and I'll include it in the description of this podcast for others to pursue, because I agree. It really is pretty interesting. I also agree that the hosts are at least as interested in talking about themselves as they are about their topic. So it does take some time in some episodes for them to get going. But I've found that as I look through their catalog, there are lots of things in that particular podcast that make great commuter listening. They're long, they're nuanced discussions that build over time and usually reach a pretty interesting conclusion, whether you agree with that conclusion or not. So I'm really very thankful that you sent that link along. And like I said before, I'll include it in the show notes because it's cool. As for the second part of your call, where you mentioned about an RPG mystery run from the perspective of knowing who done it, or whatever, from the beginning and needing to prove it, I can definitely say that that is a whole lot of fun, at least for me. And if you're the sort who's into watching actual plays, then the long-running actual play on my channel, Turn of a New Leaf, A Call of Cthulhu actual play, has that as one of its major features. Most of the different investigators in the different branches that are investigating different strange things going on in our fictional version of Boston have a very distinct and definite idea that they know who is at least partly responsible for why things are so terrible. But how do they prove it? It's very juicy, very satisfying. Anyway, thanks again for calling in, Jason. I really appreciate it. It's great to know that you're out there. And I'm looking forward to our next podcast recorded together. It's coming up soon at time of recording, where we're going to discuss BRP. All right, let's get to the blog post from the Casting Shadows blog from December 22nd, 2010. I keep mentioning that date because this is, well, it's December as I record this. It was December as I wrote the original post. But it's 2025 as I record this, and 2010 was the year that I started the blog. It had only been running since May of that year. So it's kind of interesting to go back and take a look at this one for me and hopefully for you. The post was called By Any Other Name. And don't worry, it's not about Shakespeare. So let's begin. By Any Other Name. In the very early days of my gaming, I noticed a curious thing about the world maps with which my close friend was always fiddling. Port Blacksand. If you zoomed out on any map far enough to see the coast, eventually you would come across a notation reading Port Blacksand. Had this been the same continent or world, this would not be all that unusual. But as our games and the genres we played changed, it was obvious that this was, at times, more of a Moorcockian expression of mystical geography and the overlap of planes. Damn, I wanted to go there. I still want to go there. I want to see what all the fuss was about. What element of creativity kept that one location recurring on map after map. What unrealized dreams have been kept in limbo for the nearly 30 years between then and now. Okay, here's an interjection from 2025. 30 years ago in 2010 is now pushing 45. Even if we adjust the map for whatever small number, I was bumping this up to 30 from 20, from the high 20s. Anyway, More than 40 years. Wahoo. Anyway, back to 2010. What perverse twist kept having it appear so far from where we were adventuring that we never, ever got there? In my gaming, I visited hundreds of imaginary towns, but this one, the one that got away, this one sticks in my memory like an itch I cannot scratch. Recurring themes, particularly ones that recur more as a staple of a GM's or a writer's palette, are something to which I pay a lot of attention. In my own gaming and in the fiction I truly enjoy reading, I find them to be an excellent form of shorthand to convey a clarity of description without that boxed text feel of exposition. Even if the group of players has never actually encountered the thing in question, somehow, in repetition, it takes on a certain character. In the fiction of L.E. Modisett Jr., for example, the use of certain location names across the really varied genres and styles of his writings serves as a quick narrative device for long-term readers to ascertain what sort of place a planet or town or province might be in terms of its politics, economics, and or cultural aspects. When I see a reference in one of his tales to New Augusta, I know what to expect from the denizens of that place. And this is particularly useful when New Augusta, or whatever, has no particular impact on the events at hand. The reader's attention to detail is rewarded by the inclusion of bonus detail that further focuses the universe being depicted, while not penalizing the first time or less attentive reader. Let's zoom back out to 2025. I'm still reading the works of L.E. Modisett Jr. I read his science fiction, I read his speculative fiction, and I even read his fantasy, even though listeners of this podcast know I'm not all that enamored of fantasy. If you haven't checked him out, I don't know if he will be the right writer for you, but he might be. The fantasy series that he's probably now best known for starts out with a book called The Magic of Recluse, and it goes on for more than 20 volumes, detailing different places, different times, but the same very important themes of our decisions as people and members of communities, what we owe ourselves, what we owe each other, notions of duty, honor, order and chaos, power and powerlessness, when it is right to use force, under what justifications, and who should suffer the consequences of that use. You can find these themes also represented, but in different ways and to different degrees of intensity, in his science fiction, and very poignantly and tellingly in his speculative fiction, such as the Ghosts series, which details the post-retirement adventures of a spy in a world where ghosts are really real. But anyway, let's zoom back to 2010. It is necessary to continually reinvent these recurring items and themes, of course. There's a thin line between an archetype and a cliché, and its location is in the eye of the beholder. For this reason, I feel this method works best when it's simply a layer of detail in the overall presentation of information and options, not something on which to specifically focus. In none of my friends' adventure hooks or campaigns was Port Blacksand ever a feature. Regardless, there it was, somewhere tantalizingly out of reach on the regional maps that he would prepare. Over the years, I developed a sense of what that town would be like, and I felt drawn there as a player and as my characters, without a word ever being spoken about the place in character or out. While the size, longitude, and latitude, surrounding terrain, and neighboring settlements all changed from map to map, Port Blacksand retained a certain quality about it that let me know it was the same on a quintessential level, even though it was wearing new clothes and flitting coy glances at me from across the room as though we had never met. In my own gaming, I tend to do this with restaurants and bars, almost as an homage to the elusive quality which goes into creating the ideal atmosphere in a club or diner. Having the essence of certain places of which I have grown fond in the real world become a part of the game worlds I create, and translating their essential quality into the fabric and conceit of the game at hand is a part of the fun of world building for me. Presenting these places in their new guises to my players and seeing the light of recognition dawn in their eyes has become a reward in and of itself. In what ways does this method manifest in your games? How do you use things like recurring motifs, naming conventions, regional accents, body language, styles of speaking, or any one of 100 other little things to communicate broader detail to your players and help them connect to and want to explore the world you have built? Here endeth the reading from 2010, and we are now firmly ensconced back in 2025. Now, in the years between the writing of this and now, discussions about it have kind of circled around the notion of, well, why don't you just ask them to set a game there and then you can play there and find out what it's all about? But as some of the people that I used to game with in those days have commented themselves, that would take all the fun out of it. It would take all the mystery out of it. It isn't so much the being there as it is getting there to complete the journey from wherever. Much like the eternal champion, I guess, seeking Tanalorn. All of them seem to just leave it if they stumble across it. But the ones who fight their way there as a goal in and of itself, as the answer to their questions, as an answer to their prayers, they go there and find peace. Anyway, let's keep this one short. I'll be releasing this in mid-December, which means Christmas of 2025 is on its way, as are the other year-ending holidays. And I hope whichever ones of them attract your attention, treat you well. And until the next time, take care. You have been listening to the Casting Shadows podcast, an extension of the Casting Shadows blog and the Runeslinger YouTube channel. You can find links to all of these in the show notes and to other relevant things which have come up during the course of the episode.